Alright everyone, here is a video, once again, just sort of a recap of how to actually do the layout for our telling the story outside the frame. So here is the general measurements that I have as a sample, so this is not to scale, but this is what it will look like in general. So I mentioned to be sure that you're using an accurate ruler that has a pretty good edge to it that's an even inch, and some of you may have rulers that actually have the inch start with inside the metal of the ruler. So I would be using this one because I get a really accurate measurement. The first thing you want to do is go ahead and measure the right and left hand side of the margins, which I've set at 3 inches. So when I do this, I'm going to be drawing it a little bit darker, but normally you would press really lightly with this so that you wouldn't have too much to erase after you've done your squares. The next thing I'm going to do when I measure is I'm going to put down my ruler and I'm going to take my pencil and bring it up to the point that I have put on the paper. So you can see there's my 3-inch mark, and I bring my ruler up to it and I double check. You know, I've done it now 3 times. Alright, and then once I've got that in place, I draw the line out. Alright, so now let's do the right hand side similarly. Alright, so I'm measuring the paper's edge, try to get my eye above it as best I can, making sure that my ruler is parallel here and not crooked when I make that mark. And then I'm going to do it down here. I'm at my 3 inches. Again, I like to actually be always using my right hand side and being able to see it. If I put it here just because of the barrier's here, and then I'm awkwardly drawing. So if you're left-handed, perhaps then drawing in the opposite direction I'm doing will be helpful. Take my pencil mark, put my ruler up to it, take my pencil mark, put my ruler up to it, double check to make sure that that is exactly the point that I have measured out, and then I'm going to make a line. I would again make these lines a lot lighter. You're pressing with half of the darkness that's a part of these lines. Looks like I didn't finish this one all the way down. If this occurs to you, start a point from here in the bar. You need 2 points to make a nice even measurement. And here's this one. So remember, I'm just trying to match it up, and I'm going to do that. Just to extend it so that it's nice and even. Alright, so again, not drawing darkly, but half this value or darkness. The next thing is to do a 1.5 inch border at the top, and you're going to see my head a little bit because I have to be able to get right on top of that to make sure that I'm making that even. So it's 1.5 inches. There's my line here. Move it down 1.5 inches. And I will be double checking this right now to make sure that my ruler goes. You can see I put my pencil right on the point and I move the ruler up to that point. So double check both sides, Okay. And then I draw my line across. That one seems to not have made it up there. And then 1.5 inches down here. So I'm going to use the ruler's edge. There's the 1.5 inches and another one. And I start with doing the border on all edges first. I work from the edges to the inside, the tops and bottoms to the middle, and that way my measurements within the project will stay even. You may be tempted to start in kind of like we do when we read, where we go left to right. But often, especially in beginning layout, going left to right could mean accidentally measuring things incorrectly and having things squished as we get towards the end of something in a way that doesn't look even. So let's say measurements within these squares get off. As long as I have my border frame now evenly sketched, I'll be able to have that evenly placed inside, and it won't look as off as having it squished down to the bottom too much or squished to the right or left too much. So if you remember, we want to have 3 squares that are 3.5 inches by 5 inches. So in theory, this should be 5 inches. Boom. That makes me happy. And this should be 5 inches. And there we go. I don't know if you can see that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure from the top my 3.5 inches, and I'll do that the same from the bottom. And that way, once again, I'm keeping my measurements even and symmetrical in a lot of ways inside the border. So here I'm measuring up to that line. Here's my 3.5 inches. And be sure you're using the right mark. I always do 3.5. I tell myself each time. I'm pretty methodical about making sure I'm using the right one and not guessing. Making my points, and then I'm going to draw my line across. Now in the instructions it says leave a 1/4 inch, and I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'm going to go down to the bottom and get my bottom 3.5 inch rectangle in place. So there's 3.5 inches. And there's 3.5. It looks a little crooked, so I'm going to just make that perpendicular, or excuse me, parallel here and parallel here, just to get it nice and even. There we go. Now I'm going to measure it up, put my pencil on the point, match it with the ruler, put my pencil on the point, match it with the ruler, double check. I'm going to make that line. Now, that should be, I'll measure it in the middle, 3.5. 3.5 looks good. I like to double check and measure this. That's 4, that's excellent, because it means I can do a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. So I'm going to put that on the line, make that right there. Make that 1/4 inch right there. 1/4 inch is half of the half. All right. There's my measurement there. I'm gonna, I move it around a little bit. So I want to make sure. Take your time with this. All right. If you draw above or add or on it, you can always redraw it. So starting with pencil gives us that ability to adjust. And I would practice the whole thing. Maybe you just messed up. You're like, you know what? I'm going to keep practicing this and making sure that I get these measurements correct. You can always flip it over and redo it. And I tell you what, I did this earlier just to kind of get myself warmed up on a different piece of paper, and then I redid it again. And it really helps the second time. So it doesn't hurt to do things twice because you're practicing layout, perhaps for some of you the first time. Now I'm just going to erase all of the excess right now. I don't really need these lines. What I really am trying to do is help get my sort of sketching square available, so I know how to actually place my narrative that we're working on inside those frames. So here's the beginning of that layout. Again, remember, these would be a lot lighter. They would be super lightly sketched so that when I erase them, I wouldn't see any of these darker lines. You can see those still coming through, all right? So that's a real issue, and that's why we start in the beginning with something that's a lot lighter. The next thing I would suggest is, as you start drawing your narrative, to put a piece of paper down that you can rest your hand on. Smudges can occur in these margins. You can smudge these lines. You can even smudge and run the markers that you're going to be using. So the best thing to do for that is to just kind of put a little piece of paper down and mask off the other ones, if it helps too, while you're drawing on these, and get another piece of paper just so that you can have a nice clean paper. It's going to be difficult to try and keep your border in your frames nice and even and clean, but by doing so, the reason why I want everybody to focus so much on the care and presentation of your work is that if we see smudges out here, if we see things that with pencil marks that are going beyond the line that you haven't taken the time to practice, then it doesn't look like this presentation is well cared for. It almost looks as though you don't care about the project itself. And if you don't care, then why should anybody else care about looking at this? So by presenting something neat and even, it says this is something worthwhile, this is something that someone has paid attention to, and we don't look at those smudge marks anymore. What we'll be looking at is the content of every frame that you are drawing, and we won't be distracted by all this extra detail in here that is suggesting otherwise. So that is my reason why I want you to take time and really practice what you're doing here in these frames.